Shalom and welcome to the Middle East Report. In this programme today, we'll be discussing some of the strategic threats facing the nation of Israel today. Warm welcome to the programme, and it's with great pleasure I welcome back an old friend to the Middle East Report, Zalmi Unsdorfer, Chairman of Likud UK. Welcome back, Zalmi. It's always a pleasure to have you on the Middle East Report, and thank you for the contribution that you've made to this programme over the years.
Good to be with you again.
And Zalmi, can you share with us a little bit of some of the work that you've been doing in terms of promoting the Likud Party here in the UK and other activities that you've done on behalf of Israel and the Jewish people?
Well, we've relaunched our Facebook page, and we're putting out some very powerful messages and memes on Israel advocacy, especially in a Britain where the leadership of the Jewish community, such as the Board of Deputies and the Jewish Leadership Council and so forth, are not as forthright in their support of Israel as we would like them to be. They're obviously fighting things like the Corbyn phenomenon and so forth, but we believe that there's a more powerful and more unapologetic voice of Zionism that needs to come through, and we are the unapologetic voice of Zionism. So visit our Facebook page and see the kind of messages we're pushing out.
Excellent. And Zalmi, it wasn't long ago until you hosted some members of Likud who are members of Israel's Knesset. What was it like bringing over Likud Knesset members here to the UK, and what was their experience?
They came to visit Parliament and to appear on campuses on behalf of the Pinsker organisation, which has brought people from Israel. Unfortunately, they've been shouted down in a number of campuses, but that's the nature of the mob rule that we see, not just here, but in the midterm fight in the United States midterm elections. We see this kind of mob rule manifesting itself. It's very interesting that all this shouting down at campuses and shouting out voices of truth and voices of reason, or just voices of a different opinion, started in terms of Israeli ambassadors and Israeli speakers on campus, and now it's any Republican, any supporter of Trump in any forum or any campus gets shouted down. So it seems to me that whatever starts with the Jews ends with everybody else, and I think that's one of the phenomena that we're seeing.
Absolutely. I mean, the same thing can be said about the rise of Jew hatred that starts attacking the Jewish people, like yourself, but it doesn't end there, does it?
No.
And we know that from history, that mainstream society suffers much worse when we see the rise of Jew hatred, and that is not challenged. In terms of Israel, now you're off to Israel next week, and you are to visit the tomb of the patriarchs in Hebron. Can you share with us what it's like to go to Hebron and to visit the tomb of the patriarchs?
Okay, well, in the Jewish synagogue on a Sabbath, every week there is a different Torah reading. And next week's Torah reading is the life of Sarah, the wife of Abraham, who died and was buried in Hebron, where Abraham bought a burial place there, and that is called the Cave of Machpelah. And that today is a combined mosque and synagogue. And this particular Shabbat, this particular Sabbath in Hebron, the entire cave, including the mosque, is given over to the Jews for their gathering, and it's tens of thousands of Jews will be there to spend the Sabbath at the grave of their matriarch Sarah, and of course we have the other Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and their wives buried there as well. The interesting thing about Hebron is when one walks through the streets there, I mean, obviously the majority of Hebron is Arab, and there are areas which are designated Jewish. Hebron was the model of Jewish and Arab coexistence in the early 20s. today it would be looked at as an unbelievable model of coexistence, and where Jews would allow Arabs to babysit their kids and vice versa, and Arab doctors were treating Jewish patients in the local hospital and so forth. And then one day the Mufti of Jerusalem cried out the usual cry, they're trying to take the Al-Aqsa Mosque down. And literally that night, something like hordes of Arabs turned on their Jewish neighbors, and 29 of them were hacked to death in that one evening in 1929. And there is a museum in Hebron which has photos and recordings of all of the suffering that went on then. And I think it's a lesson to us for all time, even now, that things just will not change as long as this hatred is stirred up by the leaders of the Arabs. The Arabs themselves are not bad people. Unfortunately, they are pawns, and they're manipulated in this way and stirred into violence.
Let's have a look now at this excellent video produced by the Israeli government press office that draws the biblical connection between Israel and the Bible.
Ever since Abraham and Sarah made their journey to the Promised Land nearly 4,000 years ago, the land of Israel has been our homeland. It's the place where Isaac and Rebekah, Jacob, Leah, and Rachel carried on their eternal covenant with God. It is where Joshua made us a sovereign nation, where David ruled and Isaiah preached, where the Maccabees fought, and where Masada fell. It's the place from which we were exiled and to which we returned, rebuilding our ancient and eternal capital, Jerusalem.
Our children are waiting to get to Israel. We're very excited.
I'm going home.
There's a really wonderful chance for foreign journalists to be able to come and get an understanding of how deep the history goes in this place.
Possiamo dire che tutte le strade portano a Gerusalemme, tutte le strade portano a Roma.
אני חושב שזה חלק מהחובה שלנו בלשכת העיתונות הממשלתית, שהכתבים הזרים יבואו ויעשו כתבות. אין כמו להרגיש את החשיבות הזאת של הקשר בין יהודים לבין נוצרים.
Without our Christian friends, the state of Israel would not have been created.
As a Christian, it's very nice to see that there was a Christian Zionist who has been actually really instrumental to the Jewish state of Israel.
We have a lot to learn from Israel. They do it just because of their religion or love.
You know, obviously, I'm reporting the news, and this is the news of 2,000 years ago.
That sums up Israel perfectly. Zalmi, I was in Israel last week, and what never fails to impress me is the innovation, the technology, and Jerusalem's always changing. And this year had the privilege of getting off at Ben Gurion Airport and taking the train link all the way up to Jerusalem that takes you right into the heart of Jerusalem in 24 minutes. And if you're in a taxi, it'll take 45 minutes, 15 minutes, depending on traffic. But Israel never stops innovating, never stands still. And that we're seeing more and more Jewish people from all over the world making Israel their home. Why, as a Jewish person, is Israel so special and so important to the Jewish people worldwide?
It's home. As Frost said, home is where they got to let you in. I'm extremely Jerusalem centrist. My first appointment every morning of every day is with God. I go to prayers every morning, and synagogues are built either this way or that way, but mostly are facing Jerusalem. My synagogue actually doesn't exactly face Jerusalem, so I actually move a little bit to the left when I'm saying my prayers. I'm very centrist. There's never a day I don't think of Jerusalem. So that is I believe, should be the core of every Jew. And yes, we improvise all the time. Our innovation is great because that's how we survive. We're kind of like the deer, that's constantly looking and sensing because we're surrounded by enemies, and we have to always be constantly vigilant.
Absolutely. And Zalmi, I attended last week the Christian Media Summit organised by the Israeli government press office, which was a very lavish affair. They rolled out the red carpet for us. We were addressed by the Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu. We also had a wonderful lunch put on for us at the President's residence. And President Reuven addressed us as well, plus our own personal tour of the Israeli Knesset. Do you see that we're seeing that the Israeli government is, and particularly the Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, is recognising the important and significant role Christian evangelicals are playing in defending and standing up for the nation of Israel?
Yeah, very much so. I'm always going to Israel, every other month. And I constantly seeing Christian groups there, very enthusiastic, tremendously connected to the land, and connected to the ethos. So yes, he does recognise that, and more so when our own people, our own left-wing groups, which are funded by foreign NGOs, are attacking Israel in the United Nations. So we're very, very pleased with the solidarity that is shown by Christian groups. Definitely.
Excellent. So let's have a look at this excellent report put out by CBN that reports on the Christian Media Summit that took place.
You are ambassadors of truth. You're not merely the greatest ambassadors that Israel has around the world, you're champions of truth.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu spoke to Christian journalists at the Second Christian Media Summit in Jerusalem. More than 180 journalists, broadcasters, publishers, and communicators from some 30 nations gathered here for the three-day event called 70 Years of Israel. Among the speakers, U.S. Ambassador to Israel David Friedman, who is an Orthodox Jew.
But while I do not observe, in a religious sense, the teachings of the New Testament, I'm quite fond of many of its insights and what it has to say. None more so than the statement from the book of John, chapter 8, verse 32. It says, "Then you will know the truth, and the truth shall set you free."
Participants heard from Israeli government, military, and other leaders about Israel's achievements and challenges facing the Jewish state in the international and media arenas. Nitzan Hen heads the government press office that sponsored the event.
We need your Christian media because we know exactly that you are love us from the bottom of your heart, and you don't need to pretend.
Author Joel Rosenberg said the fact that Israel hosted such an event shows how much it values Christian reporting.
And it's encouraging to see that the government of Israel realizes that Christian journalists are people that at least are willing to consider their perspective and in fact communicate a fair picture of what's going on.
Participants said the summit was important to their understanding of Israel.
We're hearing a lot of fresh, primary source news, and that's what a good journalist should want.
There's such a wonderfully diverse community here, and I think sometimes in the evangelical community, we don't grasp that about Israel. So it's a tapestry.
You read about things in the news, but when you come here and you hear all of these speakers, and then you understand really from all these different perspectives of what's happening in this land and the media bias, the stuff that's going on, the negativity against Israel, and you hear the truth of what's happening in this land firsthand, it really opens up your eyes to everything that's going on here.
Israeli President Reuven Rivlin summed up Israeli sentiments.
Dear friends, thank you. Thank you again for coming to Jerusalem. Please take home with you a message of peace from the Holy Land and a love for Israel. Even more importantly, come back soon.
Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Yep, absolute fabulous conference. I very much want to thank the Israeli government press office for inviting me to attend what was a fabulous conference. Talking about the conference, I mean, it was very privileged that we got a press briefing by the Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, very open to questions, really understood that there were Christian journalists in the room that are friends of Israel and allies of Israel. Now, we know that Israel is going to have another general election next year. What do you think Benjamin Netanyahu's chances are of being re-elected and winning another historic term as Israel's Prime Minister?
I think it's undoubted that he will win, barring any unforeseen, unfortunate circumstance. He will definitely. He's way out ahead. And to any independent observer, you know, there's no one who comes close to the kind of breadth of knowledge and ability to communicate, certainly to the outside world and the UN. And let's not forget, I think his finest hour was when he went to Congress over the head of Obama, who wanted to kick Israel under the bus, and made that very bold appearance in Congress, to which he had, I don't know how many standing ovations. There was a lot of criticism of him, saying he was undermining the relationship with the United States president and so forth, and things would never be the same. But you know something? Since Trump came to power, and I think of all the Israeli leaders who were prepared to give up 97% of this and give up Jerusalem and give up all that kind of thing, I've had this vision of Trump coming to power and whispering into Netanyahu's ear, saying, if only you hadn't given up Jerusalem 5 years ago, you know, I would have put the embassy there. We always have to remember that there's another day and that there's another opportunity and that there's another dawn ahead. And we mustn't lose hope in our in actually brandishing our independence in sovereign rights to the homeland of Israel.
Absolutely. And what would you say that Prime Minister Netanyahu's legacy is? Because certainly in terms of Christian-Israeli relations, he's gone out of his way to cultivate evangelical Christians and that support for Israel.
I think his legacy will be the master communicator of historical Israeli, Jewish rights, I should say, to the land of Israel. And that is something which the Christian movement is exactly behind. They understand the truth of all of this. The secret is to actually not view Israel through the eyes of the media, because it is almost totally against Israel and bad-mouthing Israel and misrepresenting and libeling Israel. All you need to do, and you saw from that clip of all the people who are coming to visit Israel, they almost to a man and woman said, just being here shows us the true picture. We understand the depth of history here. You can't see that in the New York Times. You can't see that through the lens of CNN. You'll never see it through the BBC. So you have to go, and I encourage everybody, go visit Israel. It's safer than many parts of Europe. This idea that it's some kind of a military siege is a complete joke.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more with you. And Zalmi, while we're there, we had an IDF security briefing, which I really particularly enjoy those kind of briefings because it gives you a fresh perspective on some of the strategic threats and challenges facing the nation of Israel at the current time. And the biggest threat that Israel considered was the Iranian threat, not only the Iranian nuclear threat, but the fact that the Iranians have a standing army in Syria, that they've also deployed the Iranian Revolutionary Guards, and now Iranian forces are only 30 miles away from the Golan Heights, and the fact also that Hezbollah in southern Lebanon have something like over 160,000 rockets and missiles targeting Israel for the next conflict. But the most troubling thing is that these rockets and missiles are in homes of ordinary Lebanese people. And they're saying that in the next war, the civilian casualties is going to be huge. And that war could come at any moment, couldn't it?
Absolutely. And this business of human shields is a serious problem. It's something that the Arabs, when I say the Arabs, I'm talking about all the Iranian proxies. Whether, I mean, Iran is in, Hamas. Iran is Hezbollah. Iran is in Syria and also on Jordan's border. Their whole philosophy is one of human shields. Now we have a new kind of human shield, because Russia, as you know, has brought in S-300 missiles into Syria after the unfortunate accident with its plane. And it's not as if Israel isn't able to deal with S-300s. Israel's Air Force practiced against S-300s in Cyprus. So it knows how to deal with S-300s. The one thing it can't do is that the S-300s are crewed by Russian servicemen.
Yep.
And if we take out an S-300, it'll be 10 or 11 Russian servicemen, and that will create a huge incident, which neither Israel wants nor America wants. So it's human shields, not just Arab human shields. We have Russian human shields. It's a very serious situation.
We know that during the fight against ISIS in Syria, plus also the fact that Putin has been very, very keen to become the power in Syria to prop up President Assad's regime, that he's cooperated with the Iranians. He's supplied intelligence to their proxy terror group, Hezbollah, in their battle against the Sunni forces in Syria. What complications can you see in a potential military conflict involving Syria with Iran, knowing there is a heavy concentration of Russian troops and armed forces that are backing Assad's regime that is ultimately backed up by the Iranian regime?
At the end of the day, Israel has to surgically attack the Iranian infrastructure and the Iranian sites. You mentioned the Syrian army. There is no Syrian army. They are almost totally now, they were totally wiped out in the civil war. It is almost totally now Hezbollah and the Iranian Shiite Revolutionary Guards who are operating there. And it's a serious problem. As I say, we were taking these installations, these Iranian installations, out on a weekly basis until the S-300s came in. And that is the calculus that Israel and Netanyahu and Lieberman are having to weigh up right now. We hope the United States will put pressure on Putin, who is as overstretched as Russia. Putin's economy is in dire straits. Iran now faces a massively strong second round of sanctions starting in the 1st of November. And that's why you've been hearing all this rhetoric coming out of Iran, wiping Israel off the map again and so forth. They're really, really on the ropes now. They're a wounded animal, and now is a very sensitive time.
Let's have a look now at this report that's entitled, "Why is Iran on Israel's border?"
Iran openly declares its intention to annihilate Israel with its 6 million Jews. Iran sent a drone into our airspace to threaten our people. Here's a piece of that Iranian drone. I brought it here so you can see it for yourself. Israel will continue to act to prevent Iran from establishing another terror base from which to threaten Israel. We have no quarrel with the people of Iran, but we are absolutely resolute in our determination to stop and roll back the aggression of Iran's regime.
And that gives you some understanding of the threat posed by Iran to the nation of Israel. What's also sad as well is recent news reports coming out by the Supreme Leader of Iran, Khomeini, and also the President Rouhani, in a sense that they are willing to sacrifice their own people to the extent that many now in Iran face the threat of starvation, and yet Iran is still continue to funding Hamas, still continues to fund Hezbollah, still continues to mobilize and fund its army in Syria as well. Do you think this detriment against its own people could actually break this regime that's now been in power for 40 years and has brought nothing but misery and destruction and despair upon the entire planet?
You know, it's the same playbook, this, you know, using people as pawns. And the Iranian people are great people, they're innovative people, they were cultured people. Well, they are cultured people, they were great until these guys took over. But it's the same playbook. The Palestinian Arabs are pawns, the Lebanese are pawns, and those in Syria are also pawns. I'm reminded about in the Second World War, the statement that, or the observation that the Hitler's army trains to the Eastern Front ran out of gas long before they ran out of fuel in the concentration camps. It has always been, for the anti-Semites and the haters of Israel and the haters of the Jews, it's always been more important to get the Jews than to deal with their own domestic problems and their own interests. It's an all-consuming bloodlust. So that's really what's at the core of it.
And when we also talk about Iran, we've also got to talk about probably their proxy terrorist organisation, Hezbollah, that is in Arabic called the Party of God, and yet Hezbollah, like Hamas, want to see the destruction of the State of Israel. And in terms of their capabilities, are far more capable than Hamas of hurting Israel. We saw that in the last war in Lebanon in 2006. In terms of stopping Hezbollah, how do you see the US administration playing its role to curb Hezbollah activities around the world, whether they're terror networks, whether this is working with drug cartels to fund their organisation and gun running and the like?
Look, as far as money is concerned, Hezbollah depends totally on Iran, and Iran is literally, I should think by the end of this year, is going to be literally down to basket case status. And Russia is not far behind. I mean, Russia's economy is what the size of Italy's, and it's not really doing very well, and it's spending a huge amount of its resources in terms of all of this foreign adventurism. So the money side, I think, is taking care of itself. As far as the 150,000 missiles which Hezbollah has got ready to fire at Israel, I mean, frankly, that would be the total death of all of Lebanon. And yes, Israel would have a world opprobrium if it had to carpet bomb areas where all these missiles were, which are in hospitals and you know, in schoolyards and so forth. But you know, at the end of the day, when it comes to survival, you know, we will unleash whatever is necessary for us to survive. That is the lesson of Samson, is it not?
Absolutely. And let's have a look now at the threat posed by Hezbollah.
Imagine you live in a small country with more than 100,000 missiles pointed at it. And imagine the leaders who control those weapons had one stated purpose: to destroy you, to literally wipe your country off the map. What would you do? Strike first and try to destroy all the weapons? Set up an anti-missile defense system? Or would you ignore the problem and hope it goes away? You can now stop imagining, because these are real-life questions that one country in the world has to ask itself every day. That country is Israel. And the leaders who control these missiles, and the number I gave is a lowball estimate, belong to an organization known as Hezbollah, Arabic for Party of God. Moreover, they're not rogue terrorists. They actually run a country, Lebanon. You should know something about them. Hezbollah first burst onto the international scene in 1983 when they simultaneously bombed the United States Marine barracks and French paratrooper base in Beirut. 241 Americans, the largest loss of American military personnel in a single incident since World War II, and 58 Frenchmen were killed in the attacks. But this was only the beginning. More bombings followed, killing 24 people at the US Embassy Annex in Beirut in 1984, killing 85 at the Jewish Community Center in Buenos Aires in 1994, and killing 19 at a housing complex for American military personnel in Saudi Arabia in 1996. In 1985, Hezbollah terrorists hijacked TWA Flight 847, during which they beat passengers, separated those with Jewish-sounding names, and murdered US Navy diver Robert Stavum. Hezbollah also supplied roadside bombs and helped organize groups who committed terror attacks against American forces during the Iraq War. They routinely assassinated political rivals, most notably the former Prime Minister of Lebanon, Rafiq Hariri, in 2005. They provoked numerous border clashes with Israel, which escalated into a war in 2006, during which Hezbollah launched thousands of rockets at civilian targets. Today, Hezbollah is a military force, a political party, a terrorist group, and a transnational criminal organization engaged in drug trafficking, money laundering, and arms smuggling. But the most important thing to remember about Hezbollah is not Hezbollah, it's Iran. Hezbollah is an extension of Iran, and it operates under its command. Don't take my word for it. Take it from the man who has been running Hezbollah for the last 25 years and is now the most powerful man in Lebanon, Hassan Nasrallah. Here's what he said in 2016. We are open about the fact that Hezbollah's budget, its income, its expenses, everything it eats and drinks, its weapons and rockets, come from the Islamic Republic of Iran. That's pretty much always been the case. Indeed, Hezbollah is the demon child of the Iranian Revolution. Its founders were Iranian revolutionaries who operated out of Lebanon in the 1970s. After overthrowing the Shah of Iran in 1979, they set up Hezbollah in Lebanon. This is why, in the early days, Hezbollah referred to itself as the Islamic Revolution in Lebanon. That definition still fits. In the 1990s, Hezbollah added politics to its resume. This led many scholars to claim that the group had abandoned its terrorist past and its subservience to Iran. If only. In truth, throughout the decade, Hezbollah extended its murderous influence into Africa and Latin America and even into North America. Cocaine trafficking, they got very cozy with Colombian and Mexican drug cartels, phony charity operations, and a wide variety of other criminal activities brought in more cash with which to finance their political and terror operations. Today, Hezbollah dominates Lebanon. It directs the nation's major domestic and foreign policy decisions, including war. It has gained control of the Lebanese parliament, as well as its military and security agencies. It has also effectively turned Lebanon into an Iranian missile base. That's where the more than 100,000 rockets come in. Iran is working to surround Israel with missiles capable of hitting anywhere inside the country, all while pressing ahead toward developing nuclear weapons. As Hezbollah and Iran entrench themselves in Syria, where they're intent on activating a new front against Israel, the likelihood they will trigger another war, more devastating than the one in 2006, is growing. In addition, Iran has used Hezbollah to further its ambitions to become the dominant power in the region. Hezbollah operatives are deeply involved in the conflicts in Iraq and Yemen. Since 9/11, the world has come to associate terrorist threats mainly with non-state actors like Al-Qaeda and ISIS. But unlike all these others, Hezbollah is a state enterprise. As such, the threat Hezbollah poses to the West, to Arab countries, and to Israel's existence is different and far more dangerous. How do we stop Hezbollah? The key, stop Iran. I'm Tony Bedran, Research Fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies for Prager University.
Very chilling, but we should also be reminded of the threat posed to Israel by Hezbollah and their Iranian sponsors. Zalmi, when you look at the strategic threat posed by Iran, we know that we have a different administration in power in the United States, and President Trump deserves a lot of credit for pulling the United States out of the fatal Iran deal regarding Iran's plan and ambition to have nuclear weapons. How important is it that the US administration, particularly with the likes of John Bolton in his cabinet, are taking that threat of Iran seriously and taking the challenge to Iran?
Look, they understand that this is not just about Iran having intercontinental ballistic nuclear missiles. It is about that these 100,000 missiles in Lebanon are Iran's doomsday device. In terms of Iran says, if anybody attacks our home country, we will attack Israel. So it's saying to America, we're going to take out your closest ally if you touch us. That's what those 100,000 missiles are there for. Let's make no mistake about that. And as far as the other skirmishes and the other problems that we have on the Syrian border are concerned, yes, if Iran has nuclear technology and nuclear capability, then every single engagement that exists up there on the Golan Heights and up in on that border could easily turn into a nuclear exchange. So America is not going to let that happen. Israel is certainly not going to let that happen. I'm just very thankful that Trump is in the White House instead of some vacillating Democrat who would always be seeking to appease.
Absolutely. I just want to read out the first few lines of Isaiah 17, and this is a prophecy against Damascus. And it says, you can find this in Isaiah 17, that says, "See, Damascus will no longer be a city, but will become a heap of ruins. The cities of Aroer will be deserted and left to flocks which lie down, with no one to make them afraid. The fortified city will disappear from Ephraim, the royal power of Damascus. The remnant of Aram will be like the glory of the Israelites, declares the Lord." Now, it's quite incredible when we see that these prophecies by Isaiah were written over 2,000 years ago, well over 2,000 years ago, and yet the Bible is becoming alive in our day, and what the prophets spoke about is becoming alive in our day, that Israel is the fulfillment of biblical prophecy. Israel is the fulfillment of God's word. How reassuring is it for you, Zalmi, and for the Jewish people to realize that Hashem, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, is on the throne, and that Israel's protector is the Lord Almighty?
Well, we are taught that the entire world history will last 6,000 years. And we're now 5,700 years since the creation, or since Adam's creation. So by our calendar, we're kind of like Friday at the end of the week. Now, we all know that God created the world in 6 days. And on the seventh day, he rested. Now, I've always said, well, what do Jews do on the sixth day? What do Jews do before the Sabbath? Well, they come home. Well, the Jews have come home in the last century, in the last millennium, before the end of quote unquote current time, before the Messiah comes. And anyone with eyes in their head, can actually, you've got to be blind not to see what's going on. The return, the ingathering of the exiles, the disintegration of Europe, the Islamic swathe across Europe and other parts of the world, the persecution of Christians everywhere. You can see these really are end times, and we look to the power of our people and the protection of our God to see us through to the redemption. That's really what we see, because frankly, the way things look in the world today, it doesn't look too good.
No, it doesn't. But we know that he's on the throne, and ultimately, there, with the prophecies there in Isaiah 17, just talking about the destruction of the city of Damascus. I mean, 10 years ago, that would have been pretty much unbelievable. Certainly in the last decade, it wouldn't have been. But now we can see that as a real possibility, particularly with the Iranian presence in Syria, the fact that Hezbollah are on Israel's northern border, and pose that existential threat that we could see a future war involving Israel, Iran, Syria, and Lebanon, in which the God of Israel will come to Israel's defense.
Yes, not long ago, Olmert wanted to give up the Golan Heights. Now, just imagine what that would look like now. We'd have Iran shooting down at our kibbutzim. So the lesson is, no matter what is going on, we must not give up 1 inch of the homeland. We must stand firm.
Absolutely. And Zalmi, you recently visited the devastation caused by the Hamas protesters, in which they're paying the people of Gaza to try and break Israel's border, giving them money if they get shot or wounded. And it's shocking abuse of power by Hamas to use their people as pawns in a confrontation with Israel. Can you share with us some of the damage being done by these balloons and setting fire to Israel and those communities that border the Gaza Strip?
Well, you mentioned improvisation. So these balloons have been a problem. And we have the sea breezes come in like at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And so Hamas is actually, sending these balloons up during the evenings. Fortunately, through the improvisation using lasers and small drones, we're taking out about 80% of these incendiary balloons. But 20% of them have caused devastation. I was down there and I saw parched lands and parched ecology and so forth. But it's, the whole thing is scorched earth, whether it's crops and whether it's people. They don't care who or what they destroy, as long as they're continuing to stoke this conflict.
And Zalmi, I was in Michael Oren's office just about to record a program with him, and of course the main news coverage was the fact that one of Hamas's rockets, a Grad missile, hit a house in Beersheba. Thankfully, no one was injured. The family were unhurt. But the fact is that Hamas can fire these rockets, that they can reach cities, southern cities like Beersheba, poses a real dilemma, doesn't it, for the Israeli government? Because on the one hand, they can contain the threat posed by Hamas, but there's also the bigger threat that we talked about in the north. As a prime minister, what are your options? And the fear is that if Israel then sends troops into Gaza on a military offensive, the situation, you get rid of Hamas, you get a bigger problem. You then go into Gaza and you occupy Gaza. You're talking about so thousands of Israeli troops dying in order to maintain the situation. So the whole situation with the Gaza and Hamas seems to be an unsolving problem. Have you any thoughts on how to deal with this problem?
Yes, a lot goes on behind the scenes. The violence on the southern border is actually ratcheting down lately. Last weekend, you could see, or the observers could see, Hamas people coaxing some of their people away from the border. Because there's massive pressure being brought by Egypt, and Egypt has been holding regular meetings in order to try and broker some kind of a ceasefire. It's interesting that the person who came to that meeting to represent Hamas was an Iranian. So you can see this is all Iran. Iran has been stirring this pot, and it will continue to stir this pot when it's necessary, and it suits them. Right now, as we know, things are going to be difficult from Iran from the 1st of November onwards, and you can expect to see a lot of ratcheting up in various other hotspots.
Let's look at the threat posed to Israel by Hamas. And you might not hear this on the mainstream media or the mainstream news. Hamas is a terror organisation. There you go, said it on air. Zalmi, you also want to discuss what's happening with Beit Tselem, which is a far left-wing Israeli NGO that is criticising Israel in the UN. So can you share with us the threat within Israel?
Yes, I mean, as much as we talked about the evangelical Christian movement, supporting Israel and batting for Israel and putting out the truth, we have our own people Israelis who are in the pay of left-wing groups and left-wing NGOs and foreign governments slandering Israel, telling outright lies about stealing organs and abusing children in the refugee camps. I mean, the most vicious lies, which prompted a major backlash from Netanyahu last week. So the head of B'Tselem, this NGO, this left-wing NGO, was invited by, or got himself invited by Bolivia, which was chairing the United Nations session last week, to make a statement about Israel. And he excoriated Israel, talked about the whole situation in Gaza without once mentioning Hamas or the missiles or any of the atrocities that Hamas is fomenting there, even upon its own people. And Danny Danon, the ambassador, interjected in Hebrew and said to him, you who are being protected and have been protected, your life's been protected by the Israeli army all of your life, you now kick it in the teeth with these lies. So we have to look at people like organizations like B'Tselem and its sources of funding, no different to the funding of the Palestinian Authority's fund for terrorist killers. You kill Jews, you get a new house, and you get 10,000 shekels a week put into your family's bank account. We have to stop the funding. I mean, B'Tselem, this organization, it's only a few people, but it got $1 million from the EU over the last 5 years. $1 million. It got $250,000 from Christian Aid in Ireland. So there are Christian groups who are funding this, probably unknowingly, funding these lies and this undermining of the Jewish state and undermining of the truth. And by that, they are funding the oppression of the Palestinians.
Absolutely.
It has to stop. We have to stop the money.
And also the other news that came out of Israel this week, and this was with one of the leaders of the BDS campaign, an American student who wanted to study at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. She was detained by Israel, and Israel said that the Israeli authorities said she had no right to be in Israel because she calls for the destruction of the state of Israel and supports the BDS. But the Supreme Court overturned that decision. And it's sad when this happens, isn't it?
It is, because you feel that the Supreme Court, which is a self-appointing body and has always regarded itself as superior to the Knesset and like a House of Lords to the Knesset House of Commons, reversing things and throwing things back down to the lower chamber again. This is slowly coming to a stop because Ayelet Shaked, who is the brilliant justice minister, and she's unfortunately not in the Likud party, she's in Mr. Bennett's Jewish Home Party. She is radically changing that status quo so that we have judges who are elected and not just self-appointed leftists. So we're working on that, and we've got the laws which have been passed to expose NGOs who are vilifying Israel with foreign money have been very effective, and quickly may they continue.
Absolutely. So we're down to 2 minutes of the programme. Zalmi, do you have a message to our viewers about why it's so important to stand up for Israel, why it's so important to stand up for the Jewish people, particularly in this climate of hate where we're seeing the rise of Jew hatred in our nations?
I think it's all about truth. I think what we are seeing today is we're seeing mobs everywhere. Like I mentioned earlier about mobs. You know, we're seeing mobs in America in the midterm elections. People shouting out the truth. They just don't want to hear the truth, so they just shout louder. And I think Christians and Jews, we are the people of the book, and the Christians are part of the family, and we are the people who are telling the truth. And the truth is not so convenient to the enlightened masses of the world here today, and certainly as far as the Islamic revolution is concerned, whether it is the Sunnis, whether it's the madrasas which are funded by Saudi Arabia, or whether it is the export of the Islamic revolution by Iran, at the end of the day, they're trying to stifle all this. So we must shout the truth and make sure the truth is out wherever we can. CBN and your organization, Revelation TV, are important parts of that.
And Zalmi, it's great to have you back on the Middle East Report. Thank you for your excellent contribution to today's programme.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Pleasure. And I just want to thank you for watching today's Middle East report. And as Zalmi said, we're in a battle for truth. And when it comes to Israel, there is no greater battle than that battle for truth. And we can educate ourselves. We can learn about Israel's history, Israeli politics, to understand and to advocate the righteousness for Israel's cause. So let's continue to pray for the peace of Jerusalem, that God's presence would be in Israel's eternal capital, Jerusalem.
אוויר הרים צלול כיין וריח אורנים נישא ברוח הרבעים עם כל פעמונים ופתרת אילן ואבן שבויה בחלומה העיר אשר בדד יושבת ובליבה חומה חזרנו אל אורות המים לשוק ולכיכר שופר קורא בהר הבית בעיר העתיקה ובמערות אשר בסלע אלפי שמשות זוכרות נשוב נרד אל ים המלח בדרך יריחו ירושלים של זהב ושל נחושת ושל אור הלא אך בבואי היום לשיר לך ולך לקשור כתרים קטונתי מצעיר בנייך ומאחרון המשוררים כי שמך צורף את השפתיים נשיקת שרף אם אשכחך ירושלים